Hi. How are you, John?
Doing okay. Good. Everything's set up.
Hello. Wait, hold on.
Hey, Fred,
Hi, John.
welcome.
So did you send out version 3.0 or are you going to do it during the meeting or
We did, yeah.
did?
Yeah, I hope
Ooh,
hope
let
it
me
got
go
to you,
look.
but I can
Let-
email and make sure it gets out again.
I will go check.
Okay.
Let me escape and go back to my email. I've been doing some other work and so maybe it came in.
Should have been around 2 or 3 o'clock, probably, maybe before 2.
All right, let me check my clutter, just see if it went there by hack by. All right, Deb Larson, Tina Camara. Well, I have it, but I mean, you better check with other people just to make sure
Okay.
because I don't see anything from you about that time.
It should have come from Maria, I think. Let me check.
I got it.
Did you?
Good,
Yeah.
Bernie.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
Yeah, it was. Let me see here. 2:01 actually is when I got it. 2 o'clock.
Okay. Well, I have nothing between 1:30 and 3:47 on my email. So maybe it went to the Pluto and back. You never know sometimes with email.
Want me
But
to
you're
forward this? You want me to forward it to you?
No, I have it
Oh, okay, you do have it, okay.
because I
Oh,
create.
yeah, right, obviously, yeah, no kidding, yeah, okay. Oh, boy.
Yeah, I know. So John, are you going to scroll through it then? Like,
Yes, I'll have it shared. So whatever page we need to go to, I can share.
yep, cool. All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Yep.
Good afternoon.
And
Hello.
Mary Catherine. Eugene and Sherry, I was wondering if you two got the update at about 2 o'clock today in the email.
Is that the 3.0
Yeah,
version?
3.0.
Yeah, from, I think Maria sent it out.
Yeah. For some reason, Fred didn't get it, so we are just checking to see.
Yes, I got it, John.
Okay.
Wonderful.
I'm not seeing anybody else coming into the waiting room, so we've slowed down in our participant flow here. Got 14 folks. Maybe we'll wait a minute just to see.
It feels like every week it's harder out in our
Mhm.
schools.
Yeah. Got a couple more people coming. Okay. Well, maybe we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. We might have a smaller group today, but we have lots of work to do. Maybe it'll have some good discussion. And I'm going to quickly share the agenda today. So today we're going to have a just a brief update on the budget forecast from MMB. Britta will be here. She's going to join us very soon. She's just emailed me. And so we'll get to that when she joins us. But then we're going to have the rest of the meeting to really be part of just looking at the reform package and really mostly specifically at those recommendations within the pressure points. So if you can take out that document that looks like this, so you have that available, whether you have it printed or on your screen, to just maybe jot down some notes or on this or another piece of paper as we go through, and just collect your thoughts around each one of these. Just give you an opportunity to listen to your colleagues and put down things that you might not have thought of, or questions that you might need to ask. So that's what we'll be working on today. Just wanted to point out a few other things just as we go through, that there is a number off to on the farthest left-hand column that we'll want to refer to when we're talking about each of these different recommendations. And then you'll notice the page numbers in the second column that refer to the version 3.0 of the whole reform package if you want more details on any of those things. If there's anyone who does not have a copy of this or the reform package, let me know. You can let me know in the chat or just speak up. I will send you whatever copy I have. Okay. I just wanted to touch on, while we're still waiting for Britta to come, that our next meeting will be October 1. Whoops, I've got the wrong one of these up here. Hold on a sec. I added some information here. I'll get that up in just a second.
While you're doing that, John, do you want me to walk through what October could look like?
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up just as a visual, but go ahead and start. You can talk about that.
Great. Yes. And yeah, the visual will be really helpful. So good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a really full evening of information. Again, I want to stress that this evening is for you to ask questions, to make sure you're getting the clarification you need, the understanding you need. Sometimes I know some of us absorb this information in the meeting and you want to ask follow-up questions, get those jotted down. You are absolutely welcomed, encouraged to reach out afterwards. If questions come to you afterwards, please don't hesitate to do so. And so we're going to finish just walking through pieces of our work tonight. And then our next meeting is October 1st. So it's a week from today. October 1st, we're gonna do two really important things. We're gonna walk through the entire series of recommendations. So everyone, again, giving everybody a chance to sort of look at the breadth of them as well. I know Tom Melcher is working really hard on being able to share impact with us, potential impact with us on October 1st. So that'll be a piece of October 1st. Then finally on October 1st, we will share with you what a ballot will look like. What we'd like to do is put all of the recommendations, the ideas that have come out of our subgroups, our subcommittees, that have come out of the working group. We want them in a place where you can see them. You can see them listed under those pressure points we've been studying. And we're going to walk you through that ballot. We're not going to ask you to vote on October 1st, though. We're actually going to email that ballot to you because we'd like you to do two things. We'd like you again to have them, be able to see them in the aggregate, be able to see them individually if you want to spend time with proposal by proposal, ask you to endorse them, each going through the whole document, and then adding comments if you would like to, understanding that that we may use some of those comments as like pull quotes then for the final document on either some of the pressure points or on just the expectation of addressing school finance in general. And then we will collect those. We'll give you about a week to complete that. And then likely on October 2nd, or October 22nd, pardon me, we would come back together with and share the results of all of that. We'd share a final document with you, share some of the comments you made, give you time to just share any final thoughts you have, give our co-chairs time to share some final thoughts they have as it's presented, and then talk about our next steps there. So that is the timeline we're looking at. And thank you, John. Why don't I hand it back to you then to go over some of those next meeting topics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as the commissioner said, October 22nd is what we're looking at. I would guess that meeting would also be at 5:30 like this, and next week. There's probably a meeting to be avoided before that. So, but let us know if you have if there's a serious problem with that date. But you can see on a summary of what the commissioner was just saying about those meetings. Okay, so we now have our guest with us, who is Britta Rattan. Is that how you say your name,
It's a
Britta?
tricky one. It's Rayton.
Rayton, I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, that's fine. No one ever gets it right.
Okay, I will next time though. But she is with us from MMB today, and we're going to get a budget update for the state. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks for letting me join you all today. We thought it was important as you guys head into this next step of your process to just give you some context about the budget challenges we are facing as a state right now. This is a brief update on both our economic conditions and the state budget as it currently stands. This is all information that's already been publicly released, so many of you might already be aware of this. But John, if you skip to the first slide here, Minnesota Management and Budget typically does a budget and economic forecast in February and in November. This year, given the extraordinary times we are in, we ended up doing an interim budget projection in May. And so we updated our budget projections at that time. The real driver of the changes in our budget projections was the state of the US economy. And so this first slide just shows the data that we are looking at in terms of the change in our economic conditions from where we were before the pandemic hit to what we are anticipating now. So that top chart just shows the annual percent change in GDP. So you can see the very dramatic reduction that we are currently projecting in our current budget projection for the current fiscal year. And then you can also see we did this projection back in May. It was based on April economic data. So you can see back in April, we had a slightly more optimistic view of where the real GDP would be in the April projection in the current year, and a slightly more optimistic projection in terms of how quickly we would bounce back in the next calendar year 21. And so this dramatic change in our economic conditions has really been what has caused the change in our budget projections. If you'll flip to the next slide, John. The other thing to just highlight is the the impact on the workforce in Minnesota. As you can see here, this chart just takes a look at the unemployment insurance benefits. This slide is a little bit dated from the end of the summer as we were looking at information coming in on our unemployment insurance claims, but you can see the very dramatic spike in unemployment benefits starting in March and continuing through April, May, and June. And that bottom chart, I think, is really telling, just showing the unemployment benefit, continued claims for unemployment benefits, the green line representing the experience we've had in 2020, the blue line showing the prior year of 2019, and the red line showing 2009 when we faced the Great Recession. So you can see just how dramatic that increase in continued claims for unemployment benefits really was. If you turn to the next slide, John. So all of this is contributing to our current budget projection. What I just want to highlight is we always talk about our budget projections being forward-looking and uncertain given possible changes in economic conditions. This is obviously a time period when I can't emphasize that enough. Given that we don't know the direction of the path of the pandemic, that makes it really hard to project very far out. And when we do our projections, we project into the next biennium. So we have a projection for 20 and 21, but we also have a projection for 22 and 23 currently. And there's a lot of questions around the variables that play into our forecast, such as consumer confidence and how long will people continue to purchase at the level they're currently purchasing. We're seeing our monthly sales tax receipts coming in a little better than forecast, and wondering how long that might continue. Also, the question of business survival. Will businesses survive through this downturn? The volatility of our financial markets, as well as the impact of potential fiscal policy and monetary policy, as well as the big looming question of whether there will be more federal support coming both for state governments and for individuals. We had to deal with a number of revenue delays as we were making our projections, which made that somewhat difficult. And then we also just have 9 months remaining in our current biennium, which makes it really hard when we're in such uncertain times to really know what we're facing for the remainder of the biennium. If you turn to the next slide, John. So given that, what we are currently projecting in the current year is that we will be facing a deficit in the current biennium of I should say this was the May projection. We were projecting 2.426 billion in terms of the magnitude of the budget deficit in the current year. And that was a really dramatic change from what we were projecting in February, because as of our February forecast, that's the far left-hand column that you'll see on the chart there, we were projecting a budgetary balance of 1.5 billion. So with our May updated projection, our total change in our forecast had that swing of nearly $4 billion. The bulk of that was on the revenue side, and that's because it's really that massive economic change that is driving our changes in our budget projections. So you can see the revenue line. We relative to our February forecast, we lost 3.6 billion in projected revenue, given the changes in the economic condition in that very short period of time. So turning to the next slide, John. There was really very little legislative change after our May projection, but there was a small bit of change. And the largest piece of this was just that we were recognizing that the federal government was coming in with more support for our Medicaid program than we were previously projecting. And that's reflected as lower state spending because the federal government is coming in and providing more federal support, which lowers our state obligations. So you can see on this chart that our spending is reduced by 83 million compared to the May projection. And that gets us to an updated budgetary balance that's in that middle column of negative 2.34 billion. So the deficit we are now facing in the current biennium is negative 2.343 billion. So slightly improved, but that improvement is largely due to the continued emergency orders at the federal level, which continued some increased support for our Medicaid program. If we turn to the next slide. Then in July, we took our May projection and projected further out to give us a view into 22 and 23. And that's what I just really want to highlight for you today. In February, when we did our forecast, we had what we call a structural balance, meaning our projected spending out in 22 and 23 was slightly lower than the revenues that we projected to be coming in those years. So we had a structural balance of 465 million in our forward-looking planning estimates for 22 and 23. When we did our update based on our May projections, we released this in July though, we showed a significant change there as well. So our structural balance was reduced to a negative 4.744 billion. So we have a shortfall in 22-23 of 4.744 billion currently projected. And again, you can see here, this is largely on the revenue side and due to economic changes. And then the next slide, John. So we do have a fairly robust budget reserve. It's the highest we've ever had our budget reserve in our history. We have 2.37 billion in our budget reserve currently. That's just slightly larger than the projected deficit in the current fiscal year. At this point, we don't have a solution to close the gap in fiscal year 21. So it is likely that we will use much of the budget reserve in the current fiscal year, but we have another forecast coming out in November where we will re-estimate the gap in the current fiscal year. And then I think we'll see at that point to what degree we'll need to use the reserve or whether the new legislature comes in January and takes a different approach to closing that gap. What I want to highlight there is that this reserve is roughly the equivalent of the gap in the current year. If we did use the entirety of the reserve in the current year, there wouldn't be remaining reserve to address the 4.7 billion problem in 22 and 23. And with that, I will stop and ask if there's any questions from you all.
Is the next update coming in February or earlier?
November. Well, I should say we call it the November forecast. It's based on November economic data. It is typically released the first week of December. We don't have a release date planned yet. It kind of depends on when we get the economic data from our national forecasters, but it is required to be delivered to the legislature in the first week of December. And we use that forecast to actually craft the governor's budget. And then we have a subsequent one that comes out in February, and that's what the legislature works from to adopt and pass a final budget.
Britta, how much of the deficit for the next biennium is estimated to be in the first year versus the second year of the biennium?
It's a really good question. And I don't have a breakdown between the years right in front of me because I'm sitting in my in my home instead of in my office where I usually have stacks of paper that help me answer that. But because it is just reducing our revenues by kind of a consistent percentage, I think it's fairly even across the years, but I don't have the exact numbers in front of me.
Britta, does the budget projection assume any inflation on the expenditure side of the, and so if it doesn't, then that's additional deficit. Okay.
That's a fair point, and thank you for asking. Generally, no. There are some formula pieces of our budget that have inflation factors built in. Special ed actually is an example where there is some inflationary growth built into the special ed formula. And so where we have forecast programs, meaning there's not a set dollar amount in law, but instead it's based on, the number of people served, or where we have a formula program in law that has an inflationary factor, that would be built in. There's also some places in Health and Human Services where it's a formula based on cost. And because cost naturally has inflation built in, then yes. But the vast majority of the budget does not. Most relevant for K-12, the per pupil formula does not.
Britta, assuming, this is Fred Nolan, assuming
Yes.
that we send down the reserve and we come out of this at some time in the future, is it still in statute that 1/3 of the November forecast goes into rebuild the reserve? Is that currently in statute and remains in statute?
That's correct, it does. So yes, when we have surpluses projected in November, the first 33% goes to the reserve to build back the reserve. It's in a section of statute 16A.152. There is a number of priorities to how we use the surplus, but buying back the reserve is the first step.
Thank you.
Do we know if the Affordable Care Act were to be struck down, is there a significant state obligation that all of a sudden exists? And do we know what that looks like?
That's a really good question. We actually have folks working on that question currently. I don't have a budget impact estimate of that currently, but we do anticipate there could be some state costs as a result.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I've got just one quick question. It appears that the assumption is that there's no additional federal relief coming into Minnesota. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so when we do our projections, it's based on current law. So we did this projection at a point in time when the CARES Act had passed. And so we had assumed the activities of the CARES Act, including the increased payments on unemployment insurance, which actually we think has been kind of propping up consumer spending to some degree. But I think what you're getting at is probably direct relief for states. And no, there's no assumption that there will be further direct relief for states. So to the extent we could get some direct relief, that would offset this problem. So that would be great if it came to fruition. Back in the Great Recession, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act included what they called state fiscal stabilization funding, which was sent to states essentially to offset their spending on education with federal dollars and let some of those funds fall to the bottom line of the general fund and meet their obligations. And so that was really key to managing our budget through the Great Recession, hoping the federal government sees that that's an important piece. They did send federal funds to the state, but it was for direct COVID response. So we are using coronavirus relief funds right now to respond to the pandemic, but very explicitly, it can't be used to fill budget gaps. Otherwise, it can't be used to fill behind lost revenue. It can only be used for increased costs resulting from the pandemic. So we're using it for things like testing and purchasing of PPE and creating isolation spaces for homeless populations, money that went out to schools, as well as supports for childcare providers and small businesses.
Do we have a sense in the last few years? I mean, we've seen some pretty significant federal tax cuts. So do we have a sense of the Minnesota's kind of tax take, what's going on between local, state, and federal, and if that has gone down? Is there some room
Oh,
potentially
in
for
terms of
state
like
action?
the total tax burden on taxpayers.
Right.
I don't have data that I could point to, but I'm sure the Department of Revenue may have a picture of that, or our state economist might. But I don't have that at my fingertips.
And this is kind of a follow-up to Sean. When the governor crafts a proposed budget, I'm assuming it needs to be balanced, or at least take into account that it can't be negative if the budget reserve is all gone.
Right. So we do have a constitutional requirement to have a balanced budget. So the state is, different from the federal government in that we can't deficit spend according to the Constitution. So the governor's budget does need to show balance across the biennium.
Okay, anything else? Great.
Okay. Thank
Thank you,
all.
Britta.
Thanks
Really
for
appreciate
having
the
me.
information.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks, Britta.
Okay. So now we can turn our attention to the review of the reform package and looking at those different recommendations per the pressure points. So I'm going to turn it over briefly to Fred, if you just want to kind of summarize the documents a bit, if there's something you want to just point out to folks. We're going to focus on the draft recommendations per PowerPoint document. So,
John, can you zoom that up just a little bit? Just to,
Yeah.
maybe it's just my eyes, but a nice. There you go. There you go. That's better. Thanks, John. This is a little different than the thicker draft report, which has a context for each of these proposals, and the proposals which came from the subgroups are organized into the category, into general revenue category, into categoricals, and into debt service, which are generally kind of dealt with differently at the legislature. The commissioner had a great idea that we go back and reorganize this by pressure points. And so that's why you see the various page numbers in the larger document that don't always go in order, because now these are organized by the pressure points, that original document from last October, I believe. And so I've numbered them inside the pressure point just so we have a way of referring to them. That's the left-hand column. Notice that they're draft recommendations. We have not gone through any decision process yet to decide what will end up in the final report and what may end up in an appendix as something that was considered but not in the final report. Then you have the 3 columns of revenue. This is the total revenue. This is not what might happen in the first year or any phase in. This is what the total cost would be. You have the revenue and then the proposed aid and equalization aid. Now, this is the entitlement, doesn't take into account the 90-10 shift or anything like that. And then the proposed levy changes. And over to the right, you have notes. So if you print this off, you can write on it, or if you have the Word document, you can type on it. And so page 1 is basic formula, and 2.0 is cross subsidy. So you just kind of slide through it, John. Okay, then English language learn. All of those things first, we saw the SPED and English language learners were the first 2 proposals out of the box. Yeah, they go back to January and February. The basic revenue came in August. And now we have the next set on achievement gap and racial equity. Some of these things came earlier, like full service community schools and concurrent enrollment aid. If you go up to the next page. And then at 4.5, it starts with a report that we heard last week. And I thank Bernie and her team for getting this all organized and sent over to me. So it was easy to input here. Then the next page, please. Then 5.0 was also provided last week. And you can see wherever there's a new category, I've put new there to indicate. And that's in the general revenue where we redefine basic revenue and any of the new categoricals here. So next page.
Oops.
Okay, then funding streams were not available to all school districts were things that you heard in August and earlier. Next page. And then 7 are those things that are different agencies. Now here there's a number of things for charter schools because some of the changes were made earlier in the document then need to affect charter schools. And so those things are kind of related to the basic funding, LER, and location adjustment revenue. Next page. And pupil transportation, that came during COVID. It was one of the earlier presentations in June. And then we had 2 pressure point student fees and enrollment options where we didn't have any small groups. So we're just saying we had the pressure points, but no recommendations were developed. And I think it's rather late to go back and do anything about it. And then 11, you have property tax equalization. We start out with a lot of small stuff. And then in the next page, get to the debt service equalization and the homestead bond credit, which are much larger than the other things. The other pieces are current levies that we're equalizing at the percentage of ANTC and APU, as you can see, based on the implementation parameters, which are in the larger document. And finally, on the last page, we have the formula simplification work. So, John, I think you've got a process how you want us to walk through this, but that's what you have in front of you. And is, as far as I know, the total of everything that has been presented up till now to the working group.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Fred. Yeah, we'll be focusing on this. We're gonna, as I put in the agenda, I thought I put it in the agenda. I did not. We're gonna divide this up into different sections. We're gonna break into small groups. My plan is to do that 3 times so that you have a chance to just talk about sections of this at a time. So we're gonna go through, as I put in the email earlier today, you know, the first three sections, and then we'll go through 4 and 5, and then we'll have the last remaining pressure points in the last small group. Now, if somebody saw that earlier and thought there might be a better way to do that, I'm open to feedback on how you might want to do this, but I think that'll give us some time to talk individually in a smaller group, and then kind of talk in a big group, get back and forth a little bit just to process some ideas. So the first, what we're going to do is look at 1, 2, and 3. So that would be the basic formula, special ed, and EL cross subsidies. And in your groups, would like to kind of go through the different line items and think about, as a group, like which would you feel like you could endorse, and if you're not sure, what are some questions or considerations you want to bring to the group. And again, with this, like we did last time, I have a Jamboard that you can put some ideas down, any idea you want to share with the group that they can see. And I'm going to put that in, I have to put this here in the meeting. I'm going to put that in the chat here. And you know what, I may not have set it up right yet. So like last time, I'm going to need to, I just got reminded that I need to put that together. Allow you to be editors, there. Make sure I got the right link here. I think I do. Anyway, I'm gonna, either one of those links should work, but I just want to make sure that you got the right one there. So if you go to the Jamboard, it just has 1, 2, and 3 listed out there. You can just put a sticky note next to whatever just the area that you have a question of or a consideration for. And then we can come back together and just kind of discuss some of those things or have a plan to find some of that information that you might need. Any questions about what we'll be doing or things to think about?
John, this is Steve. Do we have a copy of this spreadsheet?
Yeah, you should have been emailed it about 2 o'clock today. But if you don't have any of these, I can send it to you really quickly. While Steve's looking for that, I just want to make sure your groups are
I've
going
got
to
it, John. Thank you.
your groups will be 4 or 3 people. And I think we're ready to go unless any other questions. We'll be about 10 minutes in this group.
I had to go deal with the kid quick, so.
We're the first ones back.
My camera's on.
Wow.
Look at us.
Overachievers. Maybe. We'll see how we get through the next few sections.
Right?
Yeah. I don't think it's gonna be that easy.
That was just a warm up.
Yeah.
Start with the easy stuff.
Yeah, I think we have everyone back. There's a few oops. There are a few items on the board. Mostly it sounds like there's some consensus around endorsing these things. And there was one concern just about districts availing themselves to LER, but they believe they will over time. I don't know if you want to comment on that or have any discussion. You.
This is Fred. Yeah, I think some will adopt those slower than others. But over time, we've seen the LOR go down to just maybe, I think it's 11 districts that are not using the full LOR. And a couple of them are the common districts of Franconia and Prindsburg, which are very different type districts. But the equity commitment also has to think locally. And so the way I look at it, the state gives you a helping hand, but you need to do part of the lift yourself, because much of the districts will receive equalization at 150% of average RMV per RPU. But yes, that there are going to be districts who don't take full advantage of that.
And Fred, our group discussed that. Just like when LOR began, it was very slow, but now most districts have headed in that direction, and we would anticipate the same thing would happen here. So that was part of our discussion. Thanks for the clarifications too.
Agreed.
Well, is there any other discussion on those 3 points? Everybody kind of seemed like they were kind of straightforward for most people. We've been discussing those for quite some time. Okay. All right, the next section we were going to look at is on numbers 4 and 5. So that's the achievement gap in racial equity and the people support staff to student ratios. Maybe important to maybe have some discussion ahead of time before the small groups, so maybe have them think about some things. I know there's been discussion about this in the last week. Does anyone want to comment on this section before we start? So no one wants to, this is kind of a newer section. I just want to make sure people are kind of set up to have some discussion for about 10 minutes on this. But if you don't feel like we need to have any preliminary discussion on it, we can go right into small groups.
Well, I have a question for Bernie.
Okay.
Bernie, 5.4.
Okay,
Did I miss that in the PowerPoint?
let me see.
To hire additional paraprofessionals in every comprehensive and targeted school?
What do you mean, did you miss it?
Well, I don't remember seeing it. I thought it, so I must have missed
I
it.
think it was talked about.
It was there.
Yeah, it was there. It was
Okay.
there. Yep,
Okay.
you're right.
Okay. Good. I'm glad I caught it the second time.
Yeah. And I know there's concerns about categoricals, but I'm interested in hearing the conversation from folks in small groups around it, so.
I guess maybe take a little risk here, but I I don't know that I'm in favor of keeping achievement and integration aid if we're adding other aids like racial equity aid, for example. I think I would rather just take the money from A&I and roll it in, and if you need to make racial equity aid a higher number, but just from a finance perspective of tracking yet another thing is sometimes challenging.
I'm going to be putting you into different groups this time. There's one less group, so you'll have a little bigger. Some of you might have, most groups are 4, one is 5 people. So you can think about some of the things that people just spoke of. But again, keeping in mind just how you think this works with the big package, and what are some questions or considerations that you want people to think about. You can go to the next page of the Jamboard, and you'll see these 2 headings on the next page of the Jamboard. And you do that right at the top. There's little arrows and it shows the page numbers. If anybody's not seeing that, let me know. But if everybody's ready, I'll put you in the rooms for about another 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and maybe have some discussion. Okay, here we go. Okay, everyone, welcome back. It's always a good indication that people are in deep conversation when you wait the whole minute before you come back into the room, like people don't come back early. So I can tell that there was some discussion going on. You can still use the Jamboard to put some ideas and discussion items up there, questions, considerations. What I could also do is just, everybody has the Jamboard up, but I could also share that if needed. We can also keep items up, but is there anything that somebody wants to add to the discussion or highlight in the note that you put on here?
Well, I will tell you that our group had, some good discussion, and we all agree that special ed is a priority, and nobody is questioning that at all. And you will hear from me again and again, and maybe you'll get tired of me saying it, but if we don't raise some of these issues around equity and put them in front of people, at least, we haven't done it before. And so when does it become a priority? I mean, I saw the money just like all of you. So I know that we will definitely not get everything we want, but again, it is, when do we start having these real hard conversations around what we really have to have in order to help close the achievement gap and the opportunity gap for our kids. So that's my 12 cents today.
Inflation more than 2 cents.
Okay.
Yeah. We definitely have one of the largest achievement gaps in the nation and graduation gaps. And I know for American Indian reservations, we have them in the poorest parts of the state. There's no question about that. And so I can see the idea of racial equity aid, that this is a problem and we need to address it. The question is, do we address it in a few funding streams, or maybe just one funding stream with broad purposes like Safe Schools revenue, or do we have multiple funding streams like we see here? And then what's a reasonable number, and then how do we phase it in and all that? That's what I would say to this, Bernie. It's we're staring the facts in the face. We have no funding streams other than American Indian revenue, which was based on the same rationale that they have the lowest graduation rate. It might be useful to find out from some of the districts that get a significant amount what they're actually doing. I know that they have American Indian coordinators who reach out to families and tribes and trying to make sure that the young people are doing that's better, making better progress. But I don't know a lot of details.
Well, and we know it goes well beyond that. Obviously, yes, our Native American kids are, again, it's abysmal. We should be doing way better by them, but our demographics of our state, you all know this, have changed and will continue to change. And we have got to meet those needs, and we've got to get to a place where it does become a priority. And it's, we have to have legislators that believe in that, and that will have the political will to make sure it happens.
I do think part of our charge here, at least as I see it, though, is to really lay out what is needed and not to try and do the legislature's job, which is going to be to pare down and to say this is what we're able to fund. I think we have a unique opportunity to really lay out what the actual need is, and we had a lot of that conversation first group, and I think we were talking about that in our last group as well, which is this idea that there are a lot of categoricals here, and how much of that is a result of our formula being too low and our cross subsidies being so high. And so I think it all lends itself to really identifying what is the actual number, and it's a lot bigger than even what is being presented here, I think is what I'm hearing people say.
Okay. Well, we still have some areas to get to. Are there any other comments people want to make, or any even suggestions on how we might think about this differently, or
Can I say one thing, John? This is Amy Nelson. So in my group, I've been really overwhelmed by the numbers, like just the sheer volume of numbers. And I know that it's important to me to put it in ways that people understand what their tax dollars are going for. And, after listening to this discussion, at first I was like, well, is it important that it's broken out? Should it be in here? Should it be somewhere else? And I think it's important that it's broken out in this way, even though, sorry, John, it's kind of an accounting nightmare. But because of the fact that they're saying, this is where this money is going and this is what we're deeming as important. And so I just want to thank everybody for the thoughtful discussion on this and all the work put into it, because I think that you're right. We're kind of saying this is what's important. So thank you.
And then John, I just want to add, and I don't think I made it on one of the notes, but one of the concerns that I had brought up in our group was about around setting, that we're going to pay, identify these ESPs at $20 an hour. I worry that when we put into policy, when it's supposed to be finance, is that taking local control away due to the bargaining group? And I respectfully, say that as someone in management, as a board director, but I want to make sure that we don't create inadvertent new cross subsidies about if a district's required to do that. I'd love to, as I said to the group, I'd love to pay every EA in the state more than what we're doing. I have to compete against McDonald's in my district, but I don't think we can really set something in statute or that's a local control issue that I think needs to be aware of, that we need to be aware of, and not try and create those issues in the future moving forward.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of sticky notes up on this section, so there's some things to think about, and even in the next week as we try to come to some conclusions around this. Maybe we'll take a look at the last sections. There's a lot now in this next piece, but we have 6 through 12 to look at. But they are all things, most of those are things you've been discussing for a while, so you may have some pretty good thoughts about them. But try to pick out some of those that may be newer or things that you just have some questions about, and we'll focus on those. Any comments before we get into new breakout rooms to discuss 6 through 12? Okay. Try to do about 10 minutes, might be a little less on this one, but we're going to open up the rooms. And you can go to the next page. Next 2 pages of the Jamboard will be spots for new stickies.
John,
Hi.
my school board meeting starts in 6 minutes and I have to chair that.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to, I knew it was gonna be cutting it close.
Right.
I'm gonna miss the end discussion. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So maybe we can, I don't know, when are we touching base again or,
I don't think a meeting is set, so I'll have Maria set something up.
okay. Yeah, we're probably gonna need something. I think the discussion has been good.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Room 3 is back,
Okay.
in case you were wondering.
Or there it is.
Okay. Looks like everybody's back, so that's great. A couple more stickies are going up on the Jamboard for consideration. So we are coming down to the end of the meeting here. So now is just some time to highlight anything that you put on a sticky that you might want to have some discussion about, or get somebody to find some information about. Could even
John,
ask them-
I'll share a point that was discussed.
Mhm.
This is Christine.
Go ahead.
Our group very much understands why the 80-20-10 policy was designed and created. And there's so many reasons why that's a really great thing. One of the concerns that was brought up was the concern for too much power and authority given to locally elected school boards. Most locally elected school boards are actually in favor of public education and care about it, but there are people that get elected at the local level sometimes that have different agendas. And we don't, these are my words were, we don't necessarily have systems of checks and balances for school boards. And I benefit from having a really great and supportive school board, but not everybody does. And some of the people, I mean, I've watched some of the school boards happenings in other places, and there are people, you know, who are on a locally elected school board, but their own kids are in private school and they're not necessarily there for public education. So I just want to put that out. That was a discussion point for ours. And yet we also understood that if you bring a proposal to the legislature and say, okay, legislature, you have to fund all of this pie in the sky idea, that's not going to fly either. So I think there's some real brilliance in the concept of this. But the worry is putting all that on locally elected school boards. Some might renew operating levy and some may not, even though schools may need them.
Yep, I'll second that. It's a point I've been talking about too.
And I can type that in the Jamboard, John. You don't have to do that. I'll do it right now.
Okay. So as people are reading what's on the Jamboard, do you have any questions about anyone's? And remember, there's 2 pages there, page 3 and 4. At least 5 things have been added since we got out of our rooms, so you might want to take another look. John, someone like me isn't aware of what NTC and RMV are in your note. I don't know if other people might be confused about that. Acronyms
No,
are
I'll
always
write that out.
All right, any other comments that you want to make or any solutions to what Christine was saying?
I'll jump in. And one of the things we talked about in our room sort of at the end as we talk about rolling in some historic line items into a basic formula. And there's a sticky note that says, all categoricals have constituents. And I do think we spent time, I think, understanding and making sure we intellectually understood the movement of the money and and what that did for our school finance formula. We as a group did not have a lot of time or to talk, is a large group anyway. I think some of us had individual conversations to talk about what, like, historically, what might get lost, and to the point of that sticky note, if there are like additional policy concerns. And I know everybody was really disciplined about staying away from like policy decisions when we were talking about school finance numbers, but because budgets reflect people's values, oftentimes that gets woven in. And so I would just invite anybody who wants to think on that or has a reaction to some of those categoricals as values and not just as money, to just either share, either like if it's a thought right now, or reaching out to me or any of our co-chairs, just to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about that as commitments we've made in the past, using money as our proxy for that commitment, and then the work actually happening in districts and charter schools. I just want to name that's significant, and it's not lost on me, and I'm not done discussing it with like myself as well.
Okay. So some of our jobs, I think, going through this next week is to have more discussions about these things. You can use the Jamboard to add more things, and people, I would encourage you to go back to it and look at some of the items and see where you might stand on some of these. Because all of us, as the commissioner said at the beginning, are going to need to think about what we're going to be able to endorse. And we need our questions answered. So having more discussions as we move forward would be great. Next week, we'll look at some of the numbers that are associated with this and maybe get some more answers to our questions as we go forward. So hold on tight to these documents with the pressure points all numbered out, because we're hoping that maybe how your ballot will look, and we will want you just to get familiar with everything that's on there. Any other thoughts before we adjourn tonight?
I'll jump in and say I appreciated all the discussion tonight in every room I was in. I thought it was thoughtful, and it's hard to have conversations in a setting like this. As we all know, we have to continue to try to hone how we do this as time goes on, because I don't think it's going to end next week. So I do appreciate everything tonight. Thank you.
If I could just add to one quick thought, I think setting salaries and wages, I think I'm just going to speak for me. I think that personally is a policy decision. I don't disagree with it, but I do feel like it's a little bit separate from how we manage funding streams and allocate funding equitably in the state of Minnesota. The issue of what salary or wage somebody should be paid, I feel like that really, to me, that's a separate policy issue. And I don't know who agrees with me on that, but I feel like if we start doing it for one group, you'd have to do it for all. And I feel like that's a little separate from how funding streams should equitably fund the state. Now, I don't disagree. It'd be really great if we could set some of those at a statewide level. I'd be thrilled for that. I just feel like that, to me, that's just a separate policy issue and not something that's part of how we manage the funding formulas in Minnesota.
Can I put a little different spin on that? I think part of the discussion is not looking at a wage. I think part of a discussion is looking at how you fund those positions. And our discussion was a recognition that, in a lot of the conversations that we've been having around, student time out of classroom, how do we solve that? Restorative practices and other strategies. How do we get at some of the equity gaps that exist? Interventions, one-to-one, small group interventions. And recognizing the reality that a lot of that work falls on to non-licensed folks. I don't see that number as a setting a wage. I see that because that's, you know, that's not going to cover the cost of a full wage in many instances when you add benefits and everything else there. But it is a recognition of a subsidy to try and bolster how we're doing services. So similar how we're looking at a formula for how many counselors per student or how many students per counselor do we want to have based on a national formula that, you know, professional association has put together. That's how you end up at that related services professional by going through all those. There's not a real standard to be able to use when you're looking for non-licensed. So I would just add that as some context of how I've been thinking about that, which is to say, you know, we recognize that this is where a lot of this heavy lifting happens and it's necessary, and it is something like these other pieces. Having enough counselors, having enough social workers is a way to get at that. So if there are thoughts on how better to lay that out, I think would be appreciated, but I think that's the intention behind kind of where we're coming from.
And I totally appreciate that thought. And if I could just add another thought to it, I don't disagree. In fact, our paraprofessionals and others, non-licensed staff, they're always shortchanged on professional development. They're shortchanged in so many things. They need to earn a livable wage, and I'm not even disputing any of that. I also have a problem with counselor ratios. And I'll say this why, because I've pulled audits on counselors on where they spend their time. And do you know how much time can be spent on upper middle class white children, helping them get into college? If
Yep.
we're gonna pull together a counselor ratio, then let's also have a ratio, like an expectation of what a counselor's job is. That your most marginalized Black and brown students in your school don't get ignored, because your middle class white students need your recommendation letters to get into college and all that. And so I think a pure ratio, I feel like that's missing the point. If this is about really equity, racial equity, and if you know anything about me as a leader, I'm passionate about it. But I think sometimes we put targets on the wrong things. So we sometimes want to fix the symptom of a problem instead of the cause. And I totally completely agree about raising wages for paraprofessionals and such. I just think that if you start down that road, then let's talk about that as a statewide. You know, what should wages be for everybody, different categories? And I also feel very, very strongly that I've heard so many conversations about counselors. You know, we've really worked hard to make sure our counselors, we did a time audit, like a really thorough one. How's your time spent? And it was pretty shocking how much counselor time was not spent with our Black and brown students, of which are the majority in my school. And so I'm very cautious about just ratios. I'm fine if you want to have a ratio, but then let's also put some other criteria that actually means your time gets spent with the neediest children and the most marginalized in our community. So I'm just going to push back, Sean, to give another perspective also. Let's be careful about what blanket rules we make without thinking about the tails that go with it too. I've met a lot of racially unconscious counselors in my day, and more of them without being clear what we need to have our counselors doing and who they serve would be a disservice, I think, to our community. But wait, I gotta say this now because now I'm gonna be quoted for that. There's amazing counselors, and I will tell you, my counselors have really bent over backwards to change that narrative, and it's been amazing. And it doesn't mean they all have to be even people of color doing it. There are very racially conscious white people who look at their data, they look at their own time audit, and they make an intentional effort to change those previous practices. So before I go on record saying that about counselors, I just want to be careful about the blanket rule, because if we don't put something else around that, it could really perpetuate the problem, actually, in my opinion. That's just me.
It's a starting point, Christine. I mean, we have to start somewhere. Again, you know, that's kind of in my mantra tonight. We have to start somewhere.
I value, don't disagree. I have a nurse in every school. I have a full-time nurse in every school. I have a full-time social worker in every school. Like I've made those choices. So I get what we're saying here. It's just always about, let's be careful what we put in mandates without thinking through what could happen with it. That's all.
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, we've been doing that for years, right? putting things in place and not really following through with what they're.
Exactly. And that's what I just don't want to add to without thinking it through. If we really believe in racial equity, let's have this conversation that vets that a little bit. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. Any other last thoughts?
Huge thanks to everyone for the work it took to get us to this point. And the conversations and the ideas and the extra work in subcommittees and the suggestions for case studies and everything else that got us to this point. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you in a week, everybody. Let me know any questions or conversations you want to have. Please
Thank
take care of
you.
yourselves. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.